This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're doing a tablet comparison Smackdown between two hot, very high-end, nicely made tablets. Here we have the Microsoft Surface Pro with the Type keyboard attached to it, and here we have the Sony VAIO Duo 11. Convertible versus pure tablet with a clip-on keyboard, but the same power inside. Core i5 CPU, SSD drive, 4 gigs of RAM, or more depending on what you want to order with the Sony. We're going to look at them now. So here we have the tale of two Intel Core i5 Windows 8 tablets that are actually remarkably different, much as in some ways they're the same. Both of these guys are running on Intel ULV dual-core Core i5 CPUs. The Sony, they just did a refresh. When we reviewed this VAIO Duo right here, it had the 1.7 gigahertz 3317U, which is the same CPU that's in Surface Pro, but recently Sony just did a minor spec update. Intel has refreshed that CPU to a 1.8 gigahertz. You're looking at a 100 megahertz difference in performance there. Not much to talk about, but still. You can get both of these with 4 gigs of DDR3 RAM. Sony offers a couple of configuration options. Now they're really going with the 6 gig and the 8 gig, depending on whether you choose a Core i5 or Core i7. It's another thing to mention there in terms of performance. With the Sony Duo over and over again, you're going to feel more like you're listening to a story of an Ultrabook because you have all these configuration options, a lot of ports, that kind of thing. And that is what sets these two apart. But anyway, you can also get the Sony with a Core i7 CPU. You can get it with 128 or 256 gig fast SSD. Surface Pro comes with 64 or 128 gig SSD. Sony starts at $11.99. That gets you the Core i5 with 128 gig SSD and 6 gigs of RAM. Surface Pro starts at $8.99, but let's talk about the $9.99 one because it's a little more comparable. Core i5 to 128 gig SSD and 4 gigs of RAM. The Sony VAIO Duo is what we call a convertible, and you can watch our full review of this product and read our written review to learn everything you want to know about it, but the keyboard is permanently attached to it. It has a slider mechanism, and because of the slider mechanism, the keyboard is a little smaller. You can see in terms of height, it doesn't take up quite as much space. If we move it just a little bit, it's just a little bit shorter actually than the Microsoft type cover that we have clipped onto the Surface Pro there. But you get real keys, discrete keys, island-style layout. Here you get real clicky keys too, because we got the type cover right here. You could also use the Surface touch cover, which is sort of like a fabric surface cover with a membrane keyboard. But this is a little bit, at first, more like, home, the kind of keyboard you're used to. But, the drawback about this is that much as you've got room side to side here, the keys are kind of small. If you have big hands, you're probably going to have trouble adjusting to these itsy keys. The keys themselves are actually bigger on the type cover. Imagine that. Type cover has trackpad right here. This has a little optical pointer stick, which does not work remarkably well. You've got little clicker buttons down here that go with that. To me, not the end of the world because you can touch the screen or you can use the digital pen with it. Sony VAIO Duo has an 11.6-inch Full HD IPS display with 400 nits of brightness. Surface Pro, 10.6 inches, still Full HD, still IPS. You're looking at Gorilla Glass on both of these. So pretty close when it comes to that. Obviously you get a little more screen real estate here, and that gets to what do you prefer? Are you looking for something as portable as possible, so you want to go with that smaller screen, or do you want something that feels a little bit more like an Ultrabook to you, a little bit bigger? That's for you to decide. Both of these have active digitizers. What does that mean? You get 10 points of capacitive multi-touch, and you also get a digital pen. Surface Pro uses Wacom. This is what the pen looks like. Good size pen, plastic pen, but still nice ergonomics. And for the Sony VAIO Duo, we get this DuoSense 2 from N-Trig, which has a little cap on it that you're guaranteed to lose pretty soon. Metal pen, though, really nice, but a little bit shorter. So it really depends on what you're into, classy metal or longer. Okay? And whether you have a preference about N-Trig or Wacom. Right now, there are no WinTab drivers for either of these guys for pressure sensitivity in Photoshop, but you will get it in Fresh Paint, in ArtRage, in Office 2013 OneNote. We know that since N-Trig has told us that N-Trig and Adobe have been working hard on getting WinTab drivers out, but we've been waiting a couple of months, still hasn't happened. Someday it will. And likewise, Microsoft has said, yes, we will have WinTab drivers out for you people who like to draw in Photoshop with pressure sensitivity. The Wacom digitizer supports more levels of pressure sensitivity, though honestly I haven't really missed it too much with the N-Trig. I find them both pleasant to use. They're both fine for handwriting and note-taking, and they're good for art as well. One thing I can tell you is that with all the recent Wacom-equipped Windows 8 tablets I found, it's been very hard to get them to calibrate so that the pen tip is actually where it looks like it is on the screen, and Entry gets that a lot closer, and also their edge calibration is a little bit better. So you give up some pressure sensitivity with the Sony VAIO Duo and the N-Trig, but you get actual cursor location accuracy with it. Both of these guys are running full Windows 8 64-bit. You can get the VAIO Duo with either just regular Windows 8 or Windows 8 Pro, depending what you want. And Microsoft, since, well, they own that operating system, they just throw in Pro for the money that you're spending right there. They both can run all of your Windows 7 EXE applications. They can both do light gaming reasonably well. We've done things like play Skyrim at 1366 by 768 settings and low quality, and it runs just fine. Civ can play, but you're not going to play Crysis 2 and those really demanding games. Now, in terms of performance, you're looking at pretty much the same internals here, and if you buy a brand new Duo 11 now, you'll actually get slightly faster performance, probably about 6% better performance at most. And you can see our Windows Experience Index here, same on the processor. Memory speed's actually better on the Sony at 7.3 versus 5.9. But interestingly, something that I wouldn't expect to see, and this probably has to do with the fact that the Sony could use a driver update. Hello, Sony, give us one of those. A graphics score, even though they both have Intel HD 4000 graphics, is higher on the Microsoft Surface Pro for both desktop and gaming graphics. And primary hard disk, they both have very fast SSDs, so they score an 8.1. Now, in PC Mark Vantage for our Core i7 Duo here, we scored about 100 points higher than for the Surface Pro. 100 points is not really that much when you're talking 4650 versus 4750, but I expect to see a little bit of a speed bump again with that slightly newer CPU, so we're probably looking at something like 4850. And the more important thing is, with tablets that have a pure slate design like the Surface Pro, and this is also true of the Acer Iconia W700, actually to a greater extent, they have less room for cooling, and fan size is going to be smaller, so they do thermal throttling more often. Thermal throttling is when the CPU, the GPU, or both are cut down in speed to keep the temperatures down a bit. Now, the Surface Pro has actually been quite good. I used it to play Civ for an hour and a half. That's pretty demanding, and it didn't throttle heavily. The Iconia W700 that we don't have showing here, but that's another Windows 8 slate with a Core i5, throttles more. The Sony throttles the least of all, but that's because it has a bigger casing. It's got more room to work with. The brains are not behind the LCD, and yes, even LCDs can sometimes get warm. The Surface Pro, you will feel the LCD get a little warm to the touch. Not hot, you're not going to hurt yourself, but everything is sandwiched there just in that little piece. So let's take a look at these guys in tablet mode while we're talking about that, so you can see the difference in footprint. So here we have them. Obviously, the Sony is going to be bigger because it's 11.6 inches. Sony weighs 2.89 pounds versus 2 pounds for the naked Surface, 2.5 pounds for the Surface with either the touch or type keyboards, which weigh almost the same. So it's going to be a bit lighter. A little bit thicker here for the Sony because, well, it is a slider. It is a two-piece design, and that's the good part when it comes to cooling and giving you space for ports. If we take a look around on the Sony, you see a really healthy sampling of ports like you'd expect to see on a better-equipped Ultrabooks. We have our SD card slot, also memory stick duo slot, our 3.5mm audio, VGA right here, Ethernet, which is a real treat on an Ultrabook or a tablet, built right in, gigabit Ethernet, that's our charging port right there, fan vent over here, and on this side, two USB 3.0 ports, one that is capable of charging, full-size HDMI, and that's our power button right there. So, nice set of ports. If we take a look at the Surface, we see the interesting perimeter cooling design. This little gap right here is actually where the fans intake and exhaust air. So there's no single vent location, a little harder to block it, which is nice. Right here we've got our magnetic charging port connector, our mini display port. So you have to get dongle adapters if you want to use VGA or HDMI, but the good part is you can drive higher resolution displays with this, higher than 1080p that is. And on this side we have our single USB 3.0 port, and there's our 3.5mm headphone jack. So that's it, way fewer ports. If you're looking for something that's going to be your primary computer, your only computer, unless you have serious portability needs, I would probably go with the VAIO Duo because it has just so many more ports, Ethernet, 2 USB ports, and given the design where back here, this section, the bottom section, is where all the computer internals are, not right behind the display. There's room for more cooling. Both of them can get pretty loud if you're doing something like playing 3D games, but otherwise they're fairly quiet. Build quality on both of these is very nice. I would call both of them potentially emotional purchase items because the design is so compelling, the materials are so lovely, you just look at it and you want to have it. That said, this guy here is plastic on the back surface, or what would be the bottom surface when you're using it as a convertible. But I'm not going to complain about that because it doesn't get quite as hot to the touch as the metal does on the Surface. Not that the Surface Pro is going to burn you, but you notice the difference. And it's pretty darn grippy. Both of these have external volume controls as well, by the way. But as you can see from the size difference, as we mentioned, the weight difference, obviously if portability is your main concern, maybe you even have another computer or two at home, you have a desktop, you have a big notebook, you just want something that's very powerful Core i5 inside that you can take anywhere, fit in any bag very easily, bring it for work, for presentations, what have you, well, then the Surface Pro is going to win. So it all depends on what you're looking for. One single PC that can do it all, but is not quite as portable, or something that's just as portable and powerful as possible. In terms of battery life, neither of these is award-winning, I'm afraid to say. Windows 8 tablets with touchscreens and convertibles have not had stunning battery life. The Sony, we manage about 4 hours on a charge. Depends on what we're doing, but that's with mixed productivity use, a little video playback, a little music playback. And with the Surface Pro, we get about 4.5 to 5 hours, so it actually lasts a little bit longer. I think that's because Sony is usually pushing the performance envelope, and they've tuned it to get the maximum performance out of it with less respect paid to battery life. That said, with the Sony, you can get a sheet battery that clips onto the back of this guy. Makes it a little bit heavier, about 3/4 of a pound heavier. Not too bad, costs you $150, but that significantly increases run times. But you're also making it bigger and bulkier and a little bit thicker, too. It's not a hideous, giant slate of a battery, but it does make it bigger. But it's nice to have the option. Right now with Surface, there is no external battery option. What you got is what inside, and that's all there is. And in keeping with those Ultrabook creature comforts, the Sony keyboard is backlit. Obviously, touch cover and type cover are not backlit. Something that's a piece of fabric and plastic is never going to be backlit when it comes to the touch cover, but the type cover is not backlit either. The front cameras on these are fairly comparable. The rear camera on the Sony is better, but at almost £3, I never make fun of people for using their tablet as a camera because, hey, use whatever it is you got and that you want to use. But at £3, it does get a little hard to kind of wave that thing around and take pictures, to be honest. One last thing to mention, it might seem like a small point, but every tablet has the Windows key right here, or the home key. Capacitive touch key on the Surface, which is ostensibly nicer. It doesn't take much effort, you just tap on it. This has a physical home key that you press and you click on. But the nice thing is if you're actually using this for drawing or note-taking, when you're using, especially a smaller device like this, if you've got your hand over here, you're going to accidentally hit that home button sometimes and boom, what you're working on just went to the background, you're going to have to go find it again. With the clicky home key, not going to happen. So that's the Sony VAIO Duo 11 versus the Microsoft Surface Pro comparison Smackdown. Both very worthy tablets, both very powerful tablets. But as you can see, the Sony is really more of a kind of a desktop replacement, more like your standard Ultrabook, more ports, that kind of thing. Normal keyboard, small, but hey. And the Surface is for those of you who want keen portability and something that has a pure slate form factor. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video review of each of these tablets, read our written reviews, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.